So welcome, it's great to see everybody here. We've got a great turnout tonight. I understand that the exhibit, was the exhibit open? Who got to see it? Did people, oh, that's great. I mean, it's really, I'm not going to introduce the lecture tonight, that's for John Johnson to do, but it's an extraordinary collection, so this is a wonderful opportunity. A couple of sort of nuts and bolts things first, besides saying it's great to be here with all of you tonight. We are the Santa Barbara County Archaeological Society, and if you want to be a member, $15 to be a member and support this great organization and get all the emails and other opportunities that come with it. So our membership, our treasurer is here, Fred is right over here raising his hand. Yes, indeed. A well-deserved round of applause. So anybody who wants to become a member or renew your membership, because January, actually we're February now, but January is membership renewal month. So he's here, these are the forms, we have them here, and that's a great opportunity. Next month, the lecture for next month is by Dr. Lynn Gamble, and it's going to be the meaning and use of shell beads among the Chumash and other California Indians. Among other topics that I know her, among other topics that she will be talking about is the use of shell beads as actual currency in Southern California. And this is something that she's spoken on at a couple of different, written on and spoken on at a couple of different international conferences, for example. And those folks like over in Europe who study like old coins and stuff, they were fascinated. So if you want to learn about shell beads, especially their use as currency and the antiquity of their use as currency in this area, please come, and that's going to be at March 3rd, 7 p.m. And that's the other thing I need to talk about. We have decided that it is in everyone's best interest to, and this is not perhaps this evening a great example of this, but we're going to start the lectures early as opposed to late, which is what we're doing this evening. So we're going to do it at 7. So the lectures are going to be at 7 p.m., not 7:30. So keep that in mind when you make your dinner plans before you come here. And on March 3rd, we're going to have a lecture by Dr. Lynn Gamble on shell beads. So in not only the Chumash, but definitely including the Chumash. So with that, I am going to introduce Dr. Jan Johnson, who will introduce our speaker this evening. Thank you very much.
Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce Jan Timbrook. I first met Jan just almost a half century ago. And when we both went on a trip with Campbell Grant to visit a rock art site. And Campbell brought along a relatively new person who had just started working at the Natural History Museum, and that was Jan. And Jan actually started volunteering at the Museum of Natural History here back in, I think, 1972 or 73. And her first job, she tells me, is to work on the Navajo and Southwestern textile collection. And it was all in those days just folded up and put in wooden cabinets. And so Jan took responsibility. She knew something about Navajo textiles, and so she took responsibility for getting them, rolling them up on acid-free cylinders and taking care of them. And that was her initiation here at the museum. She later on joined the staff and worked here for 45 years. And much of that time, she worked with me. We both were in the same department. We were colleagues on the anthropology department. I began working here in 1986. So actually he was here, about 13 years before I began at the museum. And so Jan got interested in basketry after she came to the museum, and she took some courses that were held here and taught by people who really knew something about basketry. She really got into it. And the first article I remember reading by Jan that was about baskets was an article published in the Museum Bulletin. It was called Elementary, My Dear Hudson. which was, she was writing to Travis Hudson, who was then the curator, about how you identify some baskets that have been donated to the museum. And of course, Jan went then to graduate school and studied Chumash ethnobotany. That was her dissertation topic. And then her dissertation was turned into this wonderful book on Chumash ethnobotany, which we happen to have for sale in a new edition that just came out. And I recommend this. It's in a classic already, I think, in Chumash books on the Chumash. But Jan has had many, she was, this is her love is to work in museum anthropology. She's been really involved in, she's a good editor, she's a good writer, she's a good researcher, and she's really throws herself into exhibit planning and exhibit creation. And so the Chumash Basketry exhibit that you see there is one of Jan's works, or much of Jan went into that particular exhibit. So without any further ado, I'd like to ask Jan to come forward and tell us all about it.
Wow, I am so glad you're here, and I'm really glad to be here too. As John was saying, the museum has been really the love of my life. I've been retired for 6 years now, but I just can't walk away. So I hope those of you who had a chance to see the exhibit have enjoyed it, and those who haven't seen it yet will come back multiple times. It's supposed to be up probably for about 2 years. It may well go longer, depending on other circumstances, but I'm really proud of it and the collaboration that we've had with Chumash people in putting it together. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what's in the exhibit, but not necessarily organized in the same way the exhibit is. My plan is to talk first about the importance of basketry in Chumash life, and then we'll get into the details of how they're made and sort of historic changes. So just as a review, everybody already knows this, but this is the schematic map of Chumash territory and their neighbors. So Chumash territory is roughly from about Malibu on up to north of Morro Bay around Paso Robles, 4 northern Channel Islands, interior Santa Ynez Valley, Cuyama Valley, up to right at the edge of the drainage that goes down into the Central Valley. So it's a pretty big territory. We know it's been occupied for at least 13,000 years, maybe longer. This is the Chumash are one of the oldest groups in California, among the first people who arrived in California and settled here. And their language is completely different from any of the surrounding groups. Chumashan is basically its own language family, and the surrounding native people speak completely different languages from that. So they have great antiquity and great linguistic uniqueness. So how do we know about basketry? We have archaeological evidence. There are basket hopper mortars with asphaltum, and sometimes on the asphaltum there are impressions of the basket, the bottomless basket that was sitting on top of that. We also have bone awls, which are tools that were used for basket making as well as for leather working too. We have tarring pebbles, and these were used to line bottle-shaped baskets with tar, with asphaltum, to make them watertight. We also have ethnographic research. This is our anthropological culture hero, John Harrington, illustrating how to make a twined basketry. So Harrington interviewed Chumash people from the early 20th century on up until in the late 1950s, and amassed something like 1 million pages of handwritten field notes, a third of which was on the Chumash alone. So it's a huge amount of data, including everything about language and all different aspects of culture. So it's this huge body of information that will keep us all busy reading it, translating it, editing, and organizing it for about the next 100 years, I think. And then baskets in museum collections. The Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History has the largest collection of Chumash baskets in any public museum. We have about 50. When I started, not counting the archaeological examples, when I started here in 1973 and then joined the staff in '74, there were 3 Chumash baskets in the collection. So much of my career has been dedicated toward finding and acquiring more so that we now have this really stupendous, unique collection of Chumash basketry. I've worked a lot with Chumash people. This is some words from Samantha Sandoval, who's a Barbareño Chumash weaver. When I see these baskets in the museum, it makes me feel really good. It's a wonderful feeling to know that those baskets were made by my ancestors and that somebody took really good care of it, respected the basket and what all goes into it. So we'll talk about what all goes into it. So basketry and Chumash life. Baskets helped people meet almost all of the needs of everyday life, including, first of all, shelter. This is a Chumash house that was built by Harrington, who you see here. That's John Harrington, along with some native consultants. They built this house for the Ventura County Fair, and I think it was 1923. But you can see another one that's just starting to be set up here. It's willow poles that are sunk in a circle in the ground, and then the tops bent over and lashed together, and then cross pieces latched on, and then thatching made of tule or cattail stem. So it's basically the house is like an upside down basket. So people were living inside of baskets. For clothing, basketry hats. Chumash people didn't really wear much in the way of clothing, but women wore basketry hats, partly to protect their head from the sun, but also to protect it from the weight of the carrying strap if they're carrying heavy loads on their back. So that's a drawing that I did. And then the photo there is Magdalena Olivas, who's actually Katanamuk, but it illustrates what Chumash basketry caps were like. We don't happen to have any examples in the museum collection. The one that's in the diorama, there is one that I made because we didn't have any examples in the collection. We're still looking, though. Food, sources of food. Baskets were really, really involved in all aspects of food collection and preparation. So here's a woman and her daughter gathering seeds of wild grasses in the coastal plain. And you can see in the background, people have set the coastal plain on fire. Fire management was a really important part of Chumash adaptations and ecological strategy. So they would burn the grasslands at the right time of year, and it would encourage new growth. The ashes would fall down and act as fertilizer. Many of the seeds are actually encouraged to sprout by fire from the chemicals that are in the smoke. So by burning these habitats pretty regularly, that ensured more productive resources, including wild grasses and chia sage, which people gathered with these tennis racket-like seed beaters. Several years ago, there was a fire up behind Ojai, and we all went up there looking for fire followers. There's hillsides of chia growing, and we used badminton rackets and one of those big plastic beer tubs to collect chia seeds. And in about an hour, we got a quart of chia seeds. So seed beaters are a pretty efficient tool. And these are examples that are in the exhibit. These two were found in caves in the backcountry, and that's chia. So you whack the seed heads, and it knocks the seeds loose into a gathering basket. The way the plants grow, the seeds don't all ripen at once, so you can come back and harvest the same plant multiple times over the season. Then you need to carry those seeds back home, and we don't actually have any examples of Chumash carrying baskets in the collection. So that's an illustration of sort of a typical California Indian carrying basket or burden basket. These two photographs there are in other museum collections, and those are thought to be Chumash burden baskets, although there's really relatively little information that's been preserved about those. And then preparing food. Here in the picture, you can see the basket-like house that she's sitting in front of, and then she's pounding acorn, dried shelled acorns, in a bottomless basket that sits on top of the basket hopper mortar that I showed you in the original picture. So food preparation was occupied a lot of time. You couldn't just go to the supermarket and buy prepared food. So here's whole acorns, and you take the shells off, and you peel off that inner brown skin, and then you pound them in the basket hopper mortar. This is a bottomless basket that is sitting on top of a replica mortar. You pound it with a pestle. People talk about grinding acorns. You don't grind acorns, you pound them. You have to pulverize them. If you try grinding them, it just get paste. You don't get the powder that you really want. which is what you see here in the upper left. That's acorn powder that's been, from dried acorns that's been pulverized. And then the next step is to use a basket tray. So you put that powder on the basket tray, smear it around, and shake the tray in such a way that the coarser particles bounce off. You put those back in the mortar and grind them, or pound them some more, until you get really fine powder. So sift it on the basketry tray, and then the next step is leaching, because acorns, the coast live oak acorns are the favorite species here, and most California acorns actually are really very bitter because they have a lot of tannic acid in them. And so you need to leach that out. Here's a Miwok style, which they have a basket underneath this piece of cotton sheeting. So you put the acorn, leached acorn, the powdered acorn on that, and then pour water over that slowly, and it trickles through, washes out the tannic acid, so you're left with just the acorn that's not bitter anymore. Here in the diorama, we have a leaf-lined basin. You could also just put it in a basket and stir it up, let the acorn settle out, pour off the water, and repeat the process. The next step is cooking. So we have cooking baskets, and here's Kimberly Stevenot, a Miwok person, demonstrating here at the museum cooking acorn in a basket. This is a really cool thing. Most people don't believe you can do that, but you heat stones in the fire until they're literally red hot. You take the basket with the bleached acorn, you stir that up with water, and then you pull the stones out of the fire with like 2 big chopsticks, dunk them in a basket of water to rinse off the ashes, and then put them in the cooking basket. These baskets are so tightly woven they'll hold liquid. So you put the hot rocks in, you stir them around, and it brings the liquid to a boil. Acorn soup or mush thickens and becomes much like sort of really slimy, smooth cream of wheat in texture. And it's really good eaten with roast deer meat or smoked fish. So that's something that people would prepare almost every day. If there were leftovers, it sort of congeals in the basket, and then you can slice it up like cornmeal mush. The other kind of cooking is toasting. So this is a basketry tray that's scorched kind of on the side, and that is from toasting chia seeds with hot coals. You put the seeds in the basket, put hot coals, and shake it around so that it toasts the seeds and makes them more digestible, as well as burning off any extra chaff. And then they could be ground up and made into a gruel, or even just a sort of a paste and eaten by bites in between the bites of acorn soup. Serving the food, you have a serving tray and then like an individual mush bowl. So that would be like a bowl for acorn soup, and then a drinking cup. This is a small basket that could have been used as a cup to drink water out of. Baskets also used to store various kinds of supplies. These are archaeological examples that were found in caves in the backcountry. And you'll see in the exhibit there's one, actually this one, both of those are on exhibit, but there's also one like this that's much larger even, the largest Chumash basket ever found. So people would travel into the backcountry. They mostly lived in coastal villages, but seasonally they'd travel into the backcountry and camp out for several weeks, either gathering medicinal plants or other food supplies or hunting or whatever, but they would leave a stash of food supplies and other tools and things in basket caches inside caves. And so these are the sorts of baskets that people would leave with their supplies and then know that they could come back for them next year. Baskets also used for keeping valuables. These are called treasure baskets or trinket baskets. So bead money, other kinds of jewelry, other small valuable objects would be kept in small storage baskets like that, very fancy. Travel essentials. Now people, as I said, lived in coastal villages. They trek into the backcountry, and so you need to be able to carry your water with you, or if you're going out in the canoe all day fishing or traveling out to the Channel Islands, you want to have a source of water with you, and so these are the water bottle baskets that they would carry with them. The other travel essential is a canoe bailing basket. And this is a replica that was made, sort of a reproduction of one that Fernando Librado, Chumash elder, made in the early 20th century. So it's a bailing basket to bail out extra water, and it also would serve as a toilet in the canoe because you don't want to kind of lean off the side to eliminate. So very useful. Baskets used in social gatherings, social life and entertainment. Gambling was a popular activity, very popular activity among adults and children, both men and women, and here they're playing walnut shell dice game. It was said that sometimes when you were in need of a new village chief, like the old chief had died and there wasn't a clear heir apparent, they would roll the dice. They would play the walnut shell dice game, and the winner of that would be determined to be the new village leader. A lot of these trays are probably multi-purpose, but that's exhibited as a gambling tray with some walnut shell dice. Baskets also used in other kinds of social gatherings, festivals and ceremonies. So this is a scene from a kind of a social dance gathering. It's not necessarily a ceremonial religious gathering, but they did have kind of festivals at different times of year. And so people who attended would bring baskets full of acorns, pine nuts in this case, wild cherry pits, chia seeds, whatever, also bead money sometimes as offerings. And the village chief here would collect those offerings and store them to pay the people who danced at the ceremony, at the festival, and also to feed people who were in need, who weren't able to collect their own food. That was one of the main responsibilities of the village chief. So creating beauty, baskets are perfectly functional, being perfectly plain like this. This is a very useful multi-purpose basket. Could be a sifting tray, could be a gambling tray, could be a serving tray, any number of things. But as a basket weaver, it's real boring to make a basket that has no design in it. And so the Chumash invested a lot of time in making baskets beautiful. They didn't have to do that, but it certainly, made their life beautiful too. Baskets were used in trade. Good basket weavers' work would be much admired, and she could trade or sell the basket within her community in exchange for other kinds of things that she might need, or even outside the community with people from other villages or whatever. So baskets did circulate around throughout the whole Chumash area and out to the Channel Islands. They were also acquired by visitors who stopped by Santa Barbara. And some of these were Yankee whalers from the East Coast who would travel down the tip of South America and up to the Pacific, stopped in Santa Barbara on the way to the Hawaiian whaling grounds. And they stopped in Santa Barbara and bought these baskets. So these are some of the very few Chumash baskets that we actually have known history of it, exactly when and where they were collected and by whom. So this one was collected by the navigator on a whaling ship, the Equator, captained by Elisha Folger. And then these other two were collected by a Captain Bradshaw of the ship Lagoda. These were both whaling ships. So between about 1818, 1819 for that one, and about 1830 for those two. And you can see why people really wanted those. There are a number of Chumash baskets have turned up in private collections on the East Coast, family heirlooms that have been passed down in some of these old whaling families. So changes after European contact, including the Yankee whalers and others as well, people were already making baskets for sale and trade among themselves long before the white folks showed up wanting tourist souvenirs. So, but the fact that these new people came in and commissioned baskets in different shapes. So the Chumash were really adaptable. They continued using the same weaving technique, the same design, the same materials, but in different shapes, like this oval tray. They also made rectangular sewing baskets with lids, like Spanish ladies liked rectangular sewing baskets. English ladies or American ladies liked oval ones. So we have, there are examples of both of those. And then this is an absolutely unique basket that's in the British Museum collection. It's made in the shape of a padre's hat. And hats in this shape are mentioned in historical literature from people who visited Santa Barbara and the San Luis Obispo area. We think that one's made in the San Luis Obispo area because of the materials and the weaving technique. You can actually see that basket. It's on loan from the British Museum. It's down at the Autry Museum in Los Angeles now. It's a really rare basket. It's the only one of its kind that's known, and it was a tremendous honor for me to get to see them unpack it and put it in the display. It's something I had known about, for almost my whole career, and then to actually see it in person was really amazing. And then new designs. There are 7 known baskets of this type, which have heraldic designs from Spanish colonial coins. This is a coat of arms of Spain. And then this is a design from one of the coins that depicts the Old and New Worlds flanked by the Pillars of Hercules at the gates of the Mediterranean, and then the Spanish crown. And this one has an inscription actually woven in around the rim that says it was made by Juan de Basilia, who was a neophyte, that is a baptized Indian at San Buenaventura, desirous of contributing from the attentions of Governor Solá to his illustrious Field Marshal, Don Jose de la Cruz. So Solá was the governor of California between 1815 and 1822, which pretty much dates that basket. And John Johnson has found Juana Basilia, whose Indian name was Sitmelelene, has found her in the mission registers. So we know when she came to San Buenaventura and how long she lived there. And she was one of 3 weavers who made baskets of this type that actually wove their names into the basket. And they were requested to do that by the mission authorities as baskets were intended as gifts for high-ranking officials. But the fact that they were actually asked to weave their names into the baskets is a real mark of how much their work was admired. And you have to remember, these were not literate people. Indians didn't know how to read or write at the time, so somebody wrote out that inscription in Spanish, and she figured out how to execute it in the sort of curvilinear nature of the basket. It's just a really remarkable achievement. So there's one like this in the Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. It's actually, I think it has recently been on exhibit in their New York facility. We think it was made by the same person because it's almost identical, except it doesn't have the inscription. Then there's another one at UC Berkeley in the Hearst Museum collection made by Maria Marta. And then another one here, which is in the Franz Mayer Museum, there's one in the Franz Mayer Museum in Mexico City. This is one that's actually owned by the San Ynez Chumash tribe now, made by Maria Sebastiana. And here you can see the Spanish coin design with the Old and New Worlds, the Spanish crown, the Pillars of Hercules, executed in basketry. It's just really remarkable weavers to do this. So there are only 3 known weavers. There's 7 known baskets of this type, one of which is in Russia, but all the others are in the US. Okay, so baskets played essential roles in every aspect of Chumash life, from the cradle, from birth to the grave. And people, after they died, their body was wrapped in tule mats for burial. Now, basket making continued after colonization. This is a 1793, I think, illustration of Santa Barbara. Here's the Presidio, the mission, and this is the Indian village that existed along the coast down near the Santa Barbara waterfront in Burton Mound. So even after Native people were brought into the mission system, they continued making baskets, not so much for their own use, because by this time they had metal tools, they had pottery, they were doing agriculture, they had other kinds of activities, but they were making baskets for sale, basically. And there was always still a market for them among the mission communities and beyond. So the last of the old-time Chumash weavers, there were 3 in Ventura after the turn of the last century. So Petra Pico, who's seated here, and Donaciana Salazar were 2 of them. That's a basket attributed to Petra Pico. We have 3 or 4 of those, and that's based on one that's in the National Museum of Natural History collection, which is attributed to Petra. And I have some questions about that, but not relevant here. Anyway, so Petra, and then there's this one, which is attributed to Donaciana, based on characteristics of other baskets that she was known to have made. And then Candelaria Valenzuela, really well-known weaver in the Ventura area, who died in 1917. This is a picture of her as a younger woman. And the basket on the lower left there is one that, again, is attributed to her based on known examples of other baskets that she had made. The small bowl on the right is one that's actually documented as to have been made by her. There was a rancher in Cañada Larga up behind Ventura around the turn of the last century. And about 1910, he was given that basket by that Valenzuela woman, which it couldn't have been anyone else. And it passed down in his family. They gave it to a neighbor, it passed down in their family, and ultimately it wound up here at the museum. So we're really, really pleased to have that example. So there were no basket weavers after Candelaria died in 1917 for a long, long time. But in the 1980s, there was a person who's in the audience today who got really interested in baskets that were on exhibit here at the museum. And Anna Campbell, Patricia Anna Campbell, was a really artsy, craftsy person who I knew at UCSB in the 1960s. And she taught me how to do card weaving. And she was really interested in all kinds of kind of weaving technology. And she saw these baskets in the museum and said, you know, we've got to figure out how those were made. So she got a grant from the California Arts Council, an artist in residence grant, to spend a year at the museum studying the baskets in our collection here and all kinds of whatever literature she could find, Harrington's notes, and the other publications about them, and then doing a lot of hands-on experimentation, figuring out exactly what goes into making these baskets with the goal of introducing it back into Chumash communities. And so she began teaching Chumash people and others how to make these kinds of baskets. So here she's photographed in 1984 with Juanita Centeno and Jose Castillo, who were people who lived on the San Ynez Reservation, although not Chumash themselves. They were really conversant with Chumash culture and actually preserved and passed on a lot of it themselves. So here's a page from Harrington's notes. This is what you have to go through when you're trying to find information. These handwritten notes. So it's, and Chumash languages were not originally written down. So he figured out a way to write them down to express the sounds that don't occur in English. And so there's a mixture of Chumash languages and Spanish and some English in there too. And it shows this is how to split juncus to make sewing strands for basket making. You have to be really dedicated to work with Harrington's notes, but a lot of us really are. So this is one of Anna's illustrations showing how to hold the basket when you're making a coiled basket. So she did a lot of experimentation and figured out actually how it was done. So now we know a lot more, both from her work and from some other sources too, about how the baskets were made. So there's two main different techniques. One is twining, which is kind of like, you know, when we were kids, we all learned this sort of over and under, in and out kind of basket weaving to make like mats or placemats or whatever. But this is using two strands at once. So they cross each other every time they cross one of the warps. So the warps are the structural element, and then the weft is the moving element, or the part that binds it together. So most of the twining that you see is just two-strand plain twining, but there's fancy variations too. So these can be used to make, you know, all kinds of things. So this is just a close-up kind of showing what it looks like in the actual weaving material. Gathering baskets, like berry baskets. Now these two are not Chumash. We don't have good exhibitable examples of Chumash twined basketry of this type, but this is a generic kind of Southern California type, Diegueño, Cahuilla. You know, lots of Indians in Southern California made baskets just like that, so you can't really tell for sure which tribe it's from. And then this more open work one was made by Marianne Walking Stick several years ago. She's a Juaneño Ahashmem person, and that was on exhibit at the California Indian Basket Weavers annual gathering, and she gave it to me afterwards. Mats, the same twine technique is used to bind tule stems together to make mats for sitting on, for storing things wrapped up in them, for part of the house thatching, for all kinds of different things. And then these are archaeological fragments of things made with twined weaving. So there's part of a mat. There's some cordage made into nets and cordage in this little bag here. And those are made of surfgrass or seagrass, which is a marine plant. Looks like long green hair that grows in intertidal areas in the tide pools. And people would harvest that and twist it and make it into cordage. And that was particularly important on the Channel Islands, where most of the typical Chumash basketry plants don't grow. So they used this instead for making a lot of the things that mainland Chumash would have made with other plants. So water bottles are one kind of container that was made with twining. And you can see there's plain twining, and then there's these bands of decorative, like three-strand twining, whether that's for strength or just for you know, visual appeal. It's not really clear. But those are baskets that were lined with tar. You take hard tar that's been exposed to the air for a long time, like down at Carpinteria, Salt Marsh area, there's tar pits there. Hard tar, you pulverize it, you put it in the basket after the basket is completely woven, and then you heat those little tarring pebbles in the fire and put those in the basket with the pulverized tar and shake the whole thing around. The heat from the stones melts the tar and coats the whole inside of the basket to make it watertight. And then you pour those rocks out, fill the basket with water, and let it cure overnight, and then pour it out and refill with new water. And some people actually did say that it made the Santa Barbara water taste better. So the main material that that kind of water bottle is made from is the stems of bulrush or tule. Then there's another shape, the sort of more onion shape, that's made from the whole stems of spiny rush, Juncus acutus. And again, you see the three-strand twining there. And you can see the tar has kind of seeped through there. Sometimes they put mud on the outside of the basket before they put the tar on the inside, and that kept it from oozing out, sort of bonded together to make it more watertight. The other main basketry technique is coiling, and this is what all the really pretty fancy baskets that everybody likes to look at was made with. So you have the foundation, which is the structural part, and that's, you can either have a bundle of grass stems from deergrass or 3 rods of Indian rush, Juncus textilis, for the coil foundation. And then it's sewn with split strands, mostly of Juncus, but 1 or 2 other materials are sometimes used as well. So coiled basketry is really like sewing. It's not like weaving. You have the foundation is spiraling outward from the center. As you go, you're doing 1 stitch at a time. You poke a hole with the bone awl, put the sewing strand through, pull it tight. So you're enclosing the foundation and attaching it to the previous row as you spiral outward. So the designs all have to be made like 1 stitch at a time. You're splicing in a new color there, and then splicing in a new color there, and so on. So these designs are actually woven in at the time the basket is created. They're not like painted on or embroidered later or anything. It's like stitch by stitch, which makes those presentation baskets with the coin designs all the more amazing. So we have enough documented examples of Chumash basketry in museum collections around the world to know basically what the design layouts are. So we have, most Chumash baskets have what they call the principal band, which is this border band that's usually about 1 inch wide and 1 inch below the rim, depending on the size of the basket. And then you have the body zone designs, which can be like an overall kind of network like that, or spiraling outward from the center. Then you might have, sometimes you have designs in the middle too, although that's not so common. And then fillers in between the main body zone designs, and then more designs above the principal band, and sometimes you'll often have rim ticking, which are little blocks of alternating black and white stitches, dark and light stitches, to finish off the rim. So almost all Chumash baskets have most of these features, at least 1, sometimes more than 1, often more than 1. So that's a really simple one. So just the principal band only. And then you get these spiral designs coming outward from the center, vertical designs. Now, the thing about Chumash baskets is they mostly don't have big black areas. They're really light designs. People say they look like the designs are just floating on the surface. So they're not big, heavy, blocky designs. Here you see the principal band and then the rim ticking here. And then sometimes you've got quite a variety of designs in the same basket too. The principal band here, these vertical designs, this Candelaria called those butterfly designs. The designs sometimes have names, and it doesn't mean they symbolize anything particularly. It's just a convenient way of referring to what that pattern looks like. So butterfly. There's one, let me show you another one, Beneditos on one of the other baskets. Now this one's not in our collection, but this is a design that, I mean, people usually refer to those as bear paws, but Candelaria called them picos, meaning like bird beaks or mountain peaks. So they, you know, it's just a convenient way of referring to that particular pattern. Then you can have like an overall network design. This one's very subtle and kind of hard to see, but there's kind of these black diamonds escalating out from the center and then with white outlines. This one's at the Peabody Museum at Yale, I think. It has this, now this is the same design that's in that big storage basket. that sort of X design. So the plant materials used, the foundation can be like a bundle of deergrass flower stalks, or it can be whole stems of Indian rush. Now this is a really variable plant. Anna Campbell shown here gathering it out by Vandenberg Air Force Base, Space Force Base now. So it's a really variable plant. Some of the strands can be really slender and some of them can be really thick and sturdy. It just depends on the conditions under which it's growing and maybe genetic variability too. It's all the same species, but you have a lot of different opportunities for different uses. So here's an example of close-up. So that's the natural color of the base of the juncus stalks. Not all juncus has that, but many of them do, this sort of dark orange at the base of the stalks, and then it sort of gradates into a pale tan color, so you get these kind of variegated effects. The background could be the natural color of juncus, although I'm thinking in this case it might be a different plant. And then the black is dyed. It's also the same juncus. You dry the stalks, you split them, but you don't clean them, and then you coil it up into like a coil, like a donut, and bury it in dark, slimy, stinky organic mud around a seep or a spring where there's a lot of decaying vegetation, maybe some iron in the soil, bury it for a couple of weeks, dig it up, rinse it off, expose it to the air, and it turns dark brown or even black. But this is probably dyed, in historic times they used oak galls or acorns in a cast iron pot, or threw in like a rusty horseshoe or rusty nails, so the iron really makes the dye much blacker and fixes the dye. It's like a mordant. Candelaria said you have to be careful with weaving when you do that because the black dye can make the stems a little bit more fragile, so you have to be more careful when you're weaving. The plant that makes white is this. It looks a lot like poison oak, right? It's called sumac or sourberry. Sumac in Southern California, sourberry in Central California. And it grows like poison oak. So you cut the stalks, like you can burn the plant or cut it down, and the new growth that comes up is long and straight. Before it starts to branch, you harvest it, you strip off the leaves, you split it lengthwise into 3 pieces, peel off the outer bark, peel off the inner woody core, and you have this beautiful pearly white sewing material, which is really strong. It makes like the outlines for the black designs, or in this case, in this basket by Abe Sanchez, that's what the white material is here with black dyed juncus. So technical details. This is how, as well as the design elements and layout, we can distinguish Chumash baskets from those of other Southern California people who use the same materials by these technical features. So what we call fag ends, or the stubs, when you're splicing in a new sewing strand, you can either tuck the end under the next stitch, which you can see here pretty clearly, or you can clip them off or just pull it almost tight against the foundation. So that's what Chumash people did this. Southern California people, Los Angeles and in the desert area further south, did this kind. The non-work face stitches. The work face is the side toward the weaver. So she was always really careful to put the awl in between the stitches, not through them. So this is on the back side, so you have to be really careful when you're putting the awl through. You don't want to split the stitches on the back side. The Chumash were really careful about that. Some other people not quite so much. So those are split and not split. And then how the last coil ends. Southern California weavers oftentimes did several back stitches to finish it off, but the Chumash just tapered it down. They trimmed the foundation rods down to have kind of a smooth ending. So those are really subtle differences, and people who are obsessed with basketry like me look for that kind of thing. Now baskets are really functional, as we've seen, and as a former ceramics major, I can say that baskets are a lot better than pottery because they don't break when you drop them. They're not terribly easy to make. Pottery's not all that easy to make either. I mean, a lot of things can go wrong between, shaping it and firing it. So baskets are really a lot more resilient. People always say, well, so how come they didn't make pottery? Were they like stupid or something? I go, no, baskets are far more complex, more difficult, but a lot more suitable for a lot of purposes than pottery. And, it doesn't matter if the cat knocks it off the mantelpiece, So So they kept baskets going as long as possible. Sometimes they'd wear out, so they'd repair them with, in this case, the whole bottom was rewoven, starting from here and working backwards toward the middle. That's really amazing. Or if, like the storage baskets, some rodent chewed a hole through it, they just sew on another patch of a piece of another basket right there. I think that's really cool. So all of this knowledge that has been discerned about the characteristics of Chumash basketry and how they were made is being implemented again now by Chumash weavers today. After that long, almost 70-year hiatus where there are no Chumash weavers, now there's a whole bunch of Chumash weavers who are making really wonderful things. So here's Ernestine Ignacio de Soto and her son Gilbert Unzueta gathering juncus. This was many years ago, again out in Vandenberg. Those are the juncus stalks there. And actually, that's one of Gilbert's baskets. When people are first learning to weave, they oftentimes do pine needle and raffia baskets because those are really easy materials to get and to work with. So you get a sense of how basket weaving works. You know, get your fingers used to the sorts of motions that are required to do the sewing. So pine needle baskets are not a traditional Native American art. They were actually brought into California probably in the late 19th century. And studies have shown that they were probably originated among enslaved people who were brought to the East Coast, who were accustomed to working with particular kinds of grass in their baskets. And the closest thing that they had access to in the southeastern US was longleaf pine needles. And so they figured out a way to make baskets like that. And so after the Civil War, a lot of people moved west, brought the knowledge of that kind of basket weaving with them. And then ultimately, it wound up being taught in Indian boarding schools and even in public schools, just as a kind of a craft art, pine needle basketry, but it's not an indigenous tradition. So people often do that when they're first learning to weave, and that's my first serious basket there. It's really lumpy. But you know, there's something really appealing about basket weaving. It's really tactile. You're turning something, a plant, into something that's functional and beautiful and three-dimensional. It's just, you know, it is magic, like Julie says there. So this is from a group of San Ynez Chumash weavers who came to visit the museum basket collections in 2018. One of them at least is here tonight. So these are baskets from the museum's own collection. They're getting really up close and personal. I think Elise has a magnifying glass and she's doing the Sherlock Holmes thing with it. To really see how they were made. So they're making baskets of their own now. And Carmen actually is one of the few people making twined baskets now. This is like a serving or sifting tray that she made, and that is in the exhibit. She's agreed to loan it for the exhibit, but she wouldn't let me have it until after New Year's because she needed to use it in ceremony at New Year's. And then Lisa Valencia is promising to bring us a basket. It won't be that one, but it will be in the exhibit soon. Suzanne is here too, and she makes wonderful baskets. Oh, she just, you know, it seems like she's cranking them out. You know, she just makes all these really incredible baskets. And she expresses the same thing that all the weavers I know have said, which is an honor to be able to carry on the work that was done by those who came before us. And then Samantha Sandoval, also Santa Barbara Chumash descendant, gathers her own juncus. She collected some along Maria Ignacio Creek, which you know where that is. It's up by Tucker's Grove. That was named after her great-great-great-grandmother. 4 greats and a grandmother. And she has found other places to gather it, including on the UCSB campus, and she is making really wonderful baskets too. That's a picture of one that she had on exhibit at the California Indian Basket Weavers Association Basket Weaver Showcase. I love that picture. It's very glamorous looking. And that shows her hands when she was first working on it. And she is teaching basket weaving now. This is an incredible thing. It's the first time that a Chumash basket weaver has taught traditional Chumash basket weaving to Chumash people specifically. That's a class of all Chumash people. Yay, Samantha. So, I mean, that's just a tremendous accomplishment. It's like a huge milestone that this is a formal class that's just for Chumash people to learn their own traditional Chumash weaving. So that was taken here at the museum last fall. And There's Samantha there looking very pleased with herself for good reason. And then some other new weavers, this is Robin Redwater, and she's lending us this top-knot headdress that she made, which is on a coiled basketry base with white goose feathers. That's a traditional California Indian style of top-knot headdress. Like Ernestine says, you know, the young people who are learning to weave, they're the future. They're assuring that this knowledge will be carried on into the future. Leah Mata is Chumash from Northern Chumash from the Yaktichu Tichu Yaktilhini group in San Luis Obispo County. She's currently living in New Mexico. She married a guy from Jemez Pueblo, and she can't get sedge where she lives now. So we're trying to get her sedge so she can make a basket for the exhibit too. But I mean, she has a really meaningful statement here. Baskets are more than objects. They're a living part of Chumash living culture. They're seen as relatives that hold memories. Each basket carries the knowledge, skills, and values that are passed down through generations. These baskets reflect our relationships with the place and embodying care, balance, and reciprocity. While they can be functional objects, they're also living expressions of connection, preserving the memories of our community and guiding our work today. So baskets are so much more than just things. They have all these deeper cultural meanings that are so important to Native people today. And Eleanor says, it's a blessing those baskets are still alive. As Chumash, we do persevere. We are persevering. I think that's, you know, it's a really remarkable thing since, you know, it wasn't all that long ago everybody was being taught that the Chumash were extinct. And here they are, you know, they've been with us all the time, just sort of under the radar, but now they're coming to the fore. They're making beautiful objects. They're carrying on the language. They're making their tradition and their culture live again. So I am really privileged to be able to work with them and with others to help this knowledge go forward. So thank you very much. So let me see, I think someone is going to pass the microphone around if we have people who have questions. And you could turn the lights up too, maybe? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan. I'm seeing a lot of math in these, especially the designs and the symmetry.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble.
Oh, thank you very much, Jan. I'm seeing a lot of math.
Math, yes.
In the symmetry of these. Did they discover pi long before somebody else?
Did they discover pi? I don't know whether, I'm not sure whether that's known, but you make up a really good point. You know, people who make these baskets are scientists. They're botanists who are familiar with the plants. They're ecologists who know how to take care of them and where they can be found, how to promote their growth. They're mathematicians. They did not draw the designs out on graph paper ahead of time. They just had it in their head. They had the idea of what the design should look like. And so they just made it happen, stitch by stitch, by counting stitches to make the design come out the way they envisioned. And admittedly, sometimes the basket has a mind of its own. But generally, you know, it's in the weaver's head and not in any sort of written form. And that's really magical too, I think. But yeah, I think you make a really good point that this is really sophisticated knowledge that has been passed down for generations.
Hi, Jan. I had a question about the dating on these baskets. Do you have any in the collection that are pre-contact, and do you know much about the pre-contact dated Chumash baskets?
It's really difficult. Pre-contact, you'd need like radiocarbon dating, which means you have to destroy part of the basket in order to get enough carbon to do the dating. And so we're kind of reluctant to do that. However, some of the seagrass matting that I showed you, some of basketry technology from Daisy Cave on San Miguel Island has been dated, and it comes out 9,000 years old. Maybe older. I mean, that's roughly the carbon date. So basketry technology has been around for a long time. We do have a number of archaeological basket examples, some of which are in pretty fragmentary condition. Some of them are on display, the storage baskets, the water bottle baskets, that sort of thing. Those are from archaeological context, but we're reluctant to take samples. If a piece broke off, then maybe we'd consider it, but generally, you don't want to damage the basket if we don't need to. So in terms of dating, one of the points I make in the exhibit is you can't tell how old it is just by looking at it. You don't know what kind of a life it's had. Depends on the weaver, the skill of the weaver, the conditions under, the purpose for which it was made, the conditions under which it has lived for, generations potentially, how people handle it. You'll see a lot of them have rim damage. It's because people pick them up with one hand. Don't ever do that. If you have baskets, 2 hands underneath, please. So we're just guessing about what basketry technology has been like and how it's evolved over millennia, potentially. There's some evidence that some of the design and maybe the coiling technique actually came in from the Great Basin when people moved out to the coast, 1,200, 2,000 years ago. That's not really known for sure. That's just a hypothesis. So, that's one of the things that makes it fascinating is it's like rock art. We'll never really know all the answers.
Do you have any idea why the Chumash didn't use clay and make ceramics like so many other California Indians?
Why did they not make ceramics? I was told by a geologist that the clay we have here locally is not suitable for pottery making. It's geologically not old enough, perhaps. I forget exactly I'm not sure exactly what the characteristics are, but I was told by a geologist that we don't have good clay for pottery making here. Now, down in the desert, they did make pottery, just plain undecorated earthenware. Not like the Southwest has much different pottery traditions. But there was really not much incentive to make pottery when baskets work so much better. Now, there are a few examples of pottery that was made by Mono people up in the Sierra foothills. They sort of experimented with it for a while, but none of those pots are really, they're not really spectacular. They're not really excellent pots. They're sort of really rough, I would say. So really, I think the reason they didn't make pottery was they didn't need to.
Thank you very much for that presentation. You mentioned that Chumash people on the Channel Islands were more frequently utilizing seagrass. Are there any contemporary artists who are weaving with seagrass today?
Some people have worked with it a little bit, with seagrass, this is, the surf grass. Technically, it's illegal to collect it. It's protected, so, if it washes up on the beach, people sometimes will take that, and you have to rinse it off because it's covered with salt, and straighten it out and dry it before you can really work with it. It's black too when after it's dry it turns black. So, but it's remarkable how well it's preserved in that archaeological context. It was found from the other Channel Islands too. Is thousands of years old, which is older than most basket remains that we know of.
Hi, my name is Amy, and thank you so much for tonight. This is my son, Hawk, and he wanted to share that he made a basket last week. He's studying Chumash right now, and he just wanted to say thank you. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jan. I was intrigued by you put I don't know what kind of stuff in a slimy place where it turned black after 2 weeks for the weaving, but it reminds me that we were talking about the math, but also how you plan to collect the materials. They only come due in certain times of the year, and you can't just say, I'm going to go, like you said, you can't go to the hardware store and collect what you need. So how do you imagine the planning of one of your baskets? Is it annual or? I
think you make a good point, Annabelle, which is that you can't just go out and collect any time because there's certain, like the sumac, you have to wait until you have new straight growth, like after a fire or after you've cut it down. So there's a particular time of year when you have new growth before it starts to branch. And when the sap is flowing, it makes it easier to peel, for example. Juncus is a little bit more forgiving. You can get that at more times of year, but if the stems are older ones, they're a lot harder to pull up. They might have more dark orange at the base, but they're harder to pull up and they can be really stiff. And you can split them, but then they don't want to bend. You know, you can scrape them down a lot, but they just don't want to bend to make the sewing strand, so you get these little transverse cracks. So you have to be really familiar with the properties, with the characteristics of the plants and particular places where you can get them at particular times of year. Does that answer your question, mostly, sort of? And in terms of dyeing, the mud burial technique is one that Candelaria described, and you usually get kind of a darkish brown with that. If you want really black, you pretty much have to use iron. Some Indian people and other tribes to the south use elderberry twigs and leaves in the dye bath, and I've tried that and I get this sort of really disgusting dark olive green color. So for me, I grind up oak galls in a coffee grinder and put them in a cast iron pot, let it soak in water for 2 weeks, then introduce the juncus, leave that for 2 weeks. It comes out really nice and black.
This is great, Dan, thank you. The weaving techniques from the Daisy Cave fragments, did they use the same weaving and coiling techniques, do you know?
The Daisy Cave material, that's surfgrass or seagrass, and it's twined, not coiled. There is one example, actually I was a third co-author on a paper about what may have been a coiled water bottle basket from the Channel Islands. If you just have a fragment, you know, it's hard to tell whether it's coiled or twined. It depends on if you hold it this way or that way, which way the weave goes. So, but this one piece that came from the Channel Islands looks like it might well have been a coiled basket. In fact, in Harrington's notes, he worked with Candelaria Valenzuela and recorded a bunch of information from her, and she describes making coiled water bottle baskets, but we've never actually seen an example other than that one fragmentary one from the Channel Islands. Most of the all the water bottles other than that have been twined.
Hi, thank you, Jan, for a nice presentation. Whenever we are gathered, we get sometimes some visitors where they want to know how long does it take to make a basket?
Thank you, Inga. I'm laughing because that is the single most common question any basket weaver gets. How long does it take to make a basket? You know, we are all so time-oriented. Oh my gosh, I've done an hour and a half already. You know, we work 9 to 5, you know, punching the time clock. The short answer is it takes as long as it takes. You know, weavers don't have a deadline. If, you know, they work when they can. Sometimes, you know, they're taking care of the kids, they're making dinner. You can't just sit down and weave from 9 to 5 every day until it's done. Very few weavers I know actually keep track of how many hours go into it. One I know, though, Linda Yamani, who's an Ohlone weaver from the Santa Cruz area, she kept track of how long it took her to gather all the sedge, how many yards of sedge she split to make her baskets, how long it took her to do the weaving. But that's really rare. Most weavers just say, you know, it takes as long as it takes. You have to be patient. And if you make a mistake, you have to take it out and redo it. And, you know, you want to do it right. So they're not meeting a deadline. Thanks for asking that. Okay.
Thank you, Jan. Great presentation. I'm curious. Various different ethnic groups make their baskets with their own techniques. Are there any groups that make their baskets in a similar technique to the Chumash baskets?
Well, generally, the coiled technique is very widespread. It's like almost universal. Coiling and twining and another technique called plating are used in basket making by Native people throughout the world, really. So they're kind of universal techniques, but the difference is, you know, the materials, the individual materials that people have. And, you know, Juncus textilis, the Indian rush or basket rush, occurs over a pretty wide area. Not everybody who lives in the area where it grows used it in basket making. There was a study done decades ago now of several adjacent Great Basin groups about the plants they used in basketry and other plants. So some people used this plant, their next door neighbors from a different tribe but adjacent did not use that plant, but they used a different one. So it doesn't necessarily depend on what's available locally. Sometimes people traded for basket material too. I know among other people, redbud was traded, bracken fern root was traded, devil's claw was traded in the Southwest. So, but people sort of have their traditional materials that they like to use. They have an idea of what the basket is supposed to look like within these parameters. And so that tends to be fairly stable through time, using the same materials and the same weaving technique, and the same designs are passed on.
A second question, not directly about the baskets, but how has the, I'm not sure how to refer to the law, but is it NAPTA?
NAGPRA.
NAGPRA, thank you.
Yeah.
How has that affected our baskets in any way?
Good question. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act is a federal law, and there's also a California state version of it too, and it specifies that certain kinds of things in museum collections, shall we say, can be claimed for repatriation by Native tribes. In the case of the Chumash Sene Nez Band of Chumash Indians are the only federally recognized Chumash group, and so any Chumash things that are going to be repatriated, they're the ones who get to claim them, even though there's plenty of other Chumash people who are not affiliated with the reservation. It's just sort of a glitch in the law. But basically what the law covers is human remains, burial objects, things that were buried with a person or seem like they might have come from a burial, sacred objects, objects of cultural patrimony, which means they belong to the whole group, not to an individual. So most baskets, like, the vast majority of baskets don't fall into any of those categories. There are a few baskets that were used for ceremonial purposes, and those potentially could be subject to NAGPRA claims. But for the most part, the baskets that we have here, an exhibit, they're things that were made for utilitarian purposes. Many of them were made for sale. It was actually an important source of income for Native families for a period of time, and historically that was, the men were off being vaqueros on the ranches, the women were doing laundry and cooking and things like that, and making baskets as a source of income. So baskets made for sale would not fall under that. So, we definitely are amenable to listening to whatever claims and whatever reasoning Native people have for asking for return of objects. And, we're willing to discuss it, certainly, but the way things are interpreted now, most baskets are not subject to repatriation claims.
Once materials are gathered, stripped, prepared, is there a method for storing them, or do they need to be used immediately?
Basket materials, once they're collected and prepared and dried, they keep for a long time. You don't have to use them right away. You want them to be fully dry so that any water that is in the plant will evaporate. Because if you weave with fresh, wet material, it'll dry in the basket and then it gets all wonky and it gets loose. So, I know weavers who have had basket material that's been passed down to them by elders. So, basket materials, once they're prepared, if they're properly housed and stored, can last for a really long time before you work with them. Then you soak it again to make it pliable so you can weave with it. Yeah.
That were just used for cooking and stuff, were they all decorated fancy like these, or were they just plain pottery?
Well, see, as far as fancy baskets, the reason a lot of these baskets have been preserved is because people thought they were really pretty. And so they collected them, bought them, it's still, Native American basketry is still a very popular art object that's bought and sold in art auctions and by dealers and collectors and so on. So I think the reason we have fewer examples of plain baskets is just because nobody collected them and preserved them, because they're not real flashy. Just as useful as anything with all the decoration, but now there is a whole other issue, which is damaged baskets are sometimes repaired, restored, rewoven. Sometimes I've seen baskets that have the designs repainted because they were faded. I think that really is inexcusable. I think it has violence to the original intention and integrity of the basket. I don't think people should be doing that sort of thing, but it happens because they're more saleable if they look perfect, if they look pretty. But you know, I think the basket's history should stay with it and not be obscured by that kind of treatment. That's my soapbox. Yeah.
My favorite color is green, and I was just wondering if there is any baskets that are woven with just a slight hint of green.
Not really. I mean, some of the twined openwork Juncus gathering baskets are made with green material, but when it's dry, it turns that golden color. So, I mean, among some other tribes, you do see some green designs, but it's made with chemical dyes. It's not the natural color of the plant. Sorry, no green baskets.
Regarding the longevity of a basket, did they have to be careful to not keep them in the sun, or maybe the outer edges, were they stored face down so that they didn't get dry and crack?
Storing baskets. You probably don't want to leave them out in the sun I mean, the colors will fade if they're exposed to bright light. Like in private collections, you don't want to have them next to a sunny window. You don't want to have them next to like a heater vent or air conditioning vent. You want to maintain stable conditions. But when people were making and using these baskets, I don't think they cared that much about it. I mean, I've seen baskets that are like 3 generations old used for cooking acorn soup with hot rocks. So, these baskets can handle a lot of kind of rough handling and use, and they still keep going. And like I said, that sometimes they repaired them because they wanted to keep them going. But in terms of how Native people store baskets, I've worked a lot with the California Indian Basket Weavers Association for 25 years doing their annual exhibit. And I was shocked to see Denise have one of those tray baskets. She threw her car keys onto it. And I just went, as a curator, I just went, oh no, but these things are made to be used, and that's what people do,
Kind of an odd question, I guess, but thinking about the ticking, which you can see in some of the baskets in the Chumash display room as well, was ticking the marking periodically of dark marks on the outer rim of the basket. Is that something that's peculiar to the Chumash, and does it have a significance? Or a function?
The rim ticking you're talking about? No, other tribes did that too. I mean, you see Panamint baskets, for example, in Death Valley that are made with that. It's just sort of it's just something that Chumash people like to do. Not all Chumash baskets have that, but it is pretty common. But there are other tribes that did it too, although maybe not so consistently as Chumash weavers did. There's some evidence that there may be particular design elements that were passed down in families. It's not really clear exactly. There's one that sort of looks like a negative N inside a black block that might possibly, like they said, one of the notes said it was a tattoo mark. And Chumash didn't do much tattooing. But that may be like a family design that was passed down. But weavers did not put like an ownership mark or a signature. They didn't sign their work. And it's only been, in relatively recent years that people even thought it was important to acknowledge the individual who made them. These baskets were collected over, decades, centuries even, because they were pretty. And nobody bothered to write down the weaver's name or exactly where or when they got it. And so I think it's really tragic that weavers have been anonymous for such a long time, because they're brilliant people making beautiful works of art. And they just didn't happen to sign their work, so they didn't get credit for it. I don't want to keep you people here all night, so maybe we should cut off the questions soon.
Sorry, another question, Jan. As I understood it, the Chumash families, if the father was a storyteller, then the son became a storyteller, and it came down in the family. So were basket weavers also in that way that it was passed down generation to generation in the same family?
You know, I can't really answer that question. Was basket making like a trade that got passed down from generation to generation in the same family? And I'm not sure that the other things were either. There were some trade specializations, bead money making, you know, arrow making perhaps, you know, things like that. But I don't really know whether there's any evidence that if the father did that, then the son would learn it. Basket weaving was mostly done by women. I mean, there are some instances where a man would make the cradle basket for his sister's children, for example, or men would make baskets used for hunting or fishing kind of things. But I think probably most women knew how to make baskets. Some of them probably found it really frustrating and decided not to carry it on. But I think, you know, children, you know, young girls probably helped their mother gather materials. I think, you know, my thought is that maybe the weaver herself was not necessarily the one who gathered all the plant materials. You know, she may have had help with that. So there could have been sort of a division of labor in that regard. But, you know, young girls would learn to weave using the scraps that her mother had trimmed off. And, you know, so they would all probably be somewhat familiar with basket weaving, but not necessarily everybody carried it on as a regular activity into adulthood. And, you know, it's kind of the same now. People go, oh, I want to learn to weave a basket. And you say, okay, well, you have to go collect the materials first, and you have to prepare them. And they go, oh, that's too much work. You know, people have no patience now. You have to have a lot of patience to be a good weaver. Okay, well, thank you all so much. I'm really glad you came.